Hi, everyone. How you doing? I think the proper greeting is howdy, isn't it? Howdy. Are you having fun at South by Southwest? All right, good. We're going to keep that going here. I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank our presenting partners, Atelier, Paramount Advertising, and ComScore, particularly ComScore for partnering with us on this panel. We couldn't have done these days without these guys, so thank you very much. I want to thank my partners in programming this, Future Media Hubs, Sarah and Like, who are here in the front row. If you have any questions about them, they're a great organization of around 50 to 60 organizations, 53 organizations that are public media, startups, commercial media, doing pilots and sharing best practices and doing programming like this to share conversations about the best ways forward in media. So if you have any questions about them, please ask our friends there afterwards. This is a conversation. So this is meant to be a conversation between us and our panelists. They have things they want to share with us. I will be asking them questions. Each one of them will share a story with us about the following topic, which is the user-centric era is here. Welcome to it. I'm going to frame the conversation, but I hope that you also ask questions along the way. That's what you're here for. 3 rules here. Please try to stay off your phones unless you're taking pictures of the stage. Go ahead and do that. Share that on social media, but be present. And do contribute. Weigh in. And then our panelists will go through their answers and we'll ask them questions along the way. But I want to just frame this with a little bit of data beforehand, because that's what I do. So most of the world's population, almost 2/3, is now under the age of 40. So if you're over the age of 40, for many of you, for the first time in your lives, welcome to the minority. Super fucking awkward. In the US, we're a little older, majority under 40, a little less so, but still, the majority of humans in the United States are under the age of 40. The workforce is now about 50% millennials and Gen Z. Millennials are not kids, they have kids.
God.
Gen Z are now entering the workforce. By the end of this decade, those 2 generations will be 70, 80% of the workforce, and Generation A will be coming into the workforce. All right? When you look at Europe, super fucking old. Majority over the age of 40. So a lot of the trends in media haven't yet caught up to that area or that region because of the generational shift is lagging behind, because you people don't seem to want to have kids, apparently. And that's the flip of Latin America, which is almost 2/3 under the age of 40. Asia, almost 2/3 under the age of 40. Africa, half the population is under the age of 20. Yeah. And by the way, fastest growing incomes, fastest growing economies, a lot of them are in Africa. So when you think about the world, you have to think about the users in it and the people. When we talk about the user-centric era, think about the users themselves. It's really crucially important. Then look at what they're doing. The average user now has 13 different media sources that they use on a daily basis. Less than half are uncancelable. Less than half are must-haves. There are 2 different universes. This is data from Barb Audiences, who's represented on stage today. 2 different universes of consumption growing. Over 35, under 35. In the UK, you can see this is 35 plus, and this is under 35. Over 35, YouTube is number 3. Number 3 channel on 4 screens in the UK. Under 35, the top 3 channels are YouTube, Netflix, BBC drops to 4th place. In the US, you can see that against sometimes conventional wisdom, the majority of viewership is between broadcast and pay TV. This is ComScore data. But when you look at where the viewing is going, it's incredibly fragmented. Remember, Disney here on this chart is Disney Plus, Hulu, ABC, ESPN. YouTube is just YouTube. Or is it? This is how the fragmentation is going. And by the way, 26% other, unaccounted for, unmeasured in this. So the users are really fragmenting, and they're self-directing, and they are in control. How do we grow our businesses in this user-centric era, given this hierarchy of feeds of our users and all these plugins and all these hoops we make them jump through, logins and logouts and platforms and subscriptions? How do we build a more user-friendly ecosystem? Or how do we change our business models for the user-centric era? Those are the stories we're going to tell today. Going first, our panelists. Tell us a little bit about what you do for a living, first.
I'm John, yeah.
Yeah, let me go across and introduce everybody. John Halley from Paramount, Steve Bagdasarian from ComScore, Ruth Berry from ITV, and Justin Sampson from Barb Audiences. We have their titles up here. We know their bios from our pages, our speaker pages. John, your story to share with us in the user-centric era. How do you change your business? You are a huge media company, one of the largest in the US media ecosystem, but also in the European ecosystem. How do you change your business model to meet the user-centric era?
Well, it's absolutely right, the point that you were making about the, let's say, the composition of audiences is it's become so young. And I think about actually that SNL skit, the 50th anniversary, and it's Paul Simon and Sabrina Carpenter. And Paul Simon says, I first performed this song in 1975. And he says, you probably weren't even born yet. And Sabrina Carpenter says, my parents weren't even born yet. This is what we're dealing with. But
and I felt ancient in that.
Yeah. Listen, there is a general shift in paradigm around the way that people engage with content. And the traditional model of, you think about marketing funnels. We work in advertising, so the marketing funnel is how we think about media allocation, generally speaking. And that notion that there is a format for awareness, which was television. There are formats for consideration, things like search. There are formats for transaction. That is really not an accurate representation of people's experience, and the consumer-centric journey is one of streaming, shopping, searching, scrolling. That's the general paradigm, and in any one of those user experiences, any number of outcomes can be delivered, right? You can be in a scrolling environment and be made aware of something for the first time. You can be in a shopping environment and learn about something for the first time. You can be in a streaming environment and buy products.
So how does a brand or an organization with as many channels and as many audiences, so you have Yellowstone and you have SpongeBob.
Correct, yeah.
Right, you have The Daily Show and you have CBS Sports.
Yeah.
How do you build for all of those audiences simultaneously an ecosystem where each one of them feels a bit personalized to? And then what do you do with that information on the other side of it?
So, I mean, we think about it in terms of who we partner with and what we offer, the way that our products have evolved. We're essentially, for our big partners, trying to tell a story of our value in a different way than traditional. So the typical model would be for a big media company to talk about reach and frequency, GRPs, share of voice at the high level. The reality is, when we look at the business, we look at media business, there's been more growth in the last decade on an absolute or relative basis, on an annualized basis in the last 10 years than in any period of the last 50.
In ad spend.
In ad spend. And the social platforms have eaten that all up. And it is because they have mastered the narrative around attribution. They have told a story of put $1 in and get $4 out. They've told a story about business outcomes. Well, the rest of us who are investing many billions of dollars in content have continued to tell the story of top of the funnel metrics.
Well, I've written about this dichotomy a lot. So
yeah.
What does traditional media do to combat that outcome-based buy cycle, which
yeah.
is so powerful in the marketplace? What do you do to counterbalance?
There's been so much evolution in signal in the last 10 years. Like I would say, particularly in the last 3 or 4, you're dealing with like trillions of data signals that can be put together to understand the impact up and down the funnel. So for instance, we've invested in partnerships with Circana, EDO, which was referenced on the last panel, MasterCard, to understand the impact of household exposure on a business outcome. it's incredibly important for this asset class, right? Long-form advertising wrapped by long-form content to re-express its value
Well, and
in terms of
expensive
impact
premium
on
content,
business.
which is the point you made, which is you're investing billions and billions of dollars
Correct.
in premium long-form content of all kinds, sports and news and scripted and unscripted.
That's right.
And so that's a different environment than most social video. Not all social video.
That's right.
Because you also represent social video as well.
But we talk about the marketplace dynamic for any kind of marketer is tell me what the impact of my ad spend is. The first thing that's going to get cut is the one where
Top of funnel.
Top of funnel, right? Doubling down on performance media. That is what has happened.
But at the same time, you did something really cool last fall. You Shopify'd the VMAs, right?
Yes, right. That's right.
I mean, you really made that a retail environment,
Yeah.
and it served as both a top and bottom of funnel simultaneously. So you brought in a collection of people on social media, huge social media moment, and on television live,
Yep.
and then you could literally buy the fucking dresses
you could
that
buy the
were on the red carpet.
Yeah,
Is
that's
that
right.
correct?
That's right. So, in our view of commerce media is not only about transaction. The big idea here is get the message off of the TV screen and into the hand of the consumer. Because once that happens, they can request more information. They can transact. There are a number of things that they can do, but it sets up, a tether that allows us to describe our value much more powerfully than in the past. We're leaning in very, very heavily into commerce media. So we've done activations at the tentpole level. We've done it NFL, PGA.
This
the
means
sports.
shopping-based
Yeah,
applications.
shopping or let's say QR code driven
Well,
applications.
let me do a quick survey here. Who here has a smartphone? Okay, cool. Just want to see if you're awake.
Wait, who doesn't? That's the or
who
chose
here
not to
has their
raise their hand?
smartphone in their hand while they're watching TV? Who here has shopped, perhaps, while they're on their phone, not paying attention to what's on television with their
Right,
phone?
exactly.
So closing that loop.
Correct. Exactly.
And what's interesting is simultaneous to this, retail media is now a bigger spend from an advertising standpoint on television, on the planet Earth now than TV. Retail media is bigger. It's growing faster.
Yeah.
But top of funnel,
Right.
Off-platform retail media, like on connected television, like in the VMAs, is actually the number one way that media agencies are now looking to employ their retail media on TV.
Correct, right. So I actually think that there's a definitional problem around retail media in the way we talk about it because it's a layer. It's not a media type, right? It's a layer that enables other kinds of media. And we have a great partnership with Walmart Connect. It's, very good example. And this is the first. Our first kind of case studies, we did one with Unilever. Let's not talk about CPM, let's talk about ROAS, right? And tell me how that compares to your
return on ad spend.
Return on ad spend. Tell me how that compares to your meta investment. We need to move the discussion off of CPM and onto common denomination around business outcomes. And this goes to a point that we always make, which is what looks expensive is cheap. And what looks cheap is actually expensive when you convert it, appropriately. And the idea people have been
if you look at the
CPMs.
waste of spend, ad spend on social media, it is substantial.
Correct.
A substantial chunk of it is just bots.
Yeah.
A huge chunk. I'm not going to go out and put out a percentage in this room where people can repeat it on social media, but a huge percentage of social media ad spend is bots, is fraud. And the social media platforms know this and don't want to do anything because it's revenue.
That's right. And so I would say as a,
But it still doesn't deflate the ROAS. They still can see a demonstrable return on their investment to the level of they're willing to turn a blind eye basically as an ecosystem.
Yeah, that's right. But what I would say is this is it's not just a paramount challenge, it's a challenge of the format, right? And, we're all kind of
television,
engaging on it.
You mean?
Yeah. And I would say more specifically long form, right? So let's talk about long form advertising, 10s and 15s and 30s, wrapped by long form, more highly engaging content. It is the most valuable, converter of attention, but it is not expressed that way. And we're essentially in a fight here for expression of value as opposed to what works and what doesn't work, right? It's not accurate to say that social media is a better converter of mid and bottom funnel. It's not. It's just that the communication device is better because it's a mobile product. We're working on changing that narrative. And for the sake,
crucially, it seems as if your team, Lydia was on stage earlier today, your team is really focused on demonstrable outcomes as part of the entire
That's right.
Media mix that you're putting together. And that has to involve first-party data, stacks, and a ton of other attribution
It does. So I mentioned the 3 attribution partners that we have. The other really breakthrough thing that we're doing is we're digitizing our linear logs so that those exposures get expressed in formats that are compatible with, for instance, a trade desk attribution suite. So we can convert linear household exposures as well to a digital attribution equivalent, which, you saw that chart and you made the mention our viewing is fragmented across broadcast and pay and streaming. We need all of that reflected in outcome-based metrics under common denomination. That's a very big project. It's underway. It's going to be, we're kind of at the finish line on that one. But I do think that this journey of re-expressing the value of big media and its impact on consumer action is going to be, probably the most important thing.
And it's going to be table stakes in all the deals that you do on a moving forward basis.
Correct. I mean,
and so you're morphing your entire offering to measure audience reach, but also outcomes, and retargeting.
That's right. And step 1 of that is the reporting of it. Step 2 of it is the in-flight optimization around it, right?
Well, the real time being able to adapt, absolutely. I mean, that is one thing that I think is most emulatable given the technology that we now have on connected television.
That's right.
There's no reason to not adapt while at mid-flight.
Yeah, that's right. We're in process right now with a big social media buyer, a big social media agency that knows more about this. And the question is how do you make the buying experience for television
easier,
look like what they're doing on Meta, right?
Get down to the small and mid-sized businesses too. So that's how a big publisher adapts their ad business for this user-centric era. What is a traditional studio that is a part of a public service media organization? How do you optimize? How do you switch your business model for this user-centric era?
Yep, I think that is the ultimate question.
Well, it's the specific questions.
Yeah, and specific that I'm still working on. But yeah, big publisher too. So ITV Studios is a global business. We have 95,000 hours of programming that we distribute around the world. And my career has largely been based on that traditional distribution model, albeit spent sort of 25 years at the forefront of that as the industry pivots into more digitally focused viewing, or rather not the industry but the audiences. And I think we've seen that acceleration over the last 5 years more than ever. So it's probably about 4 or 5 years ago now, I sort of set up a digital team within the traditional distribution business, and we were looking at, you can't possibly license 95,000 hours on a B2B basis all the time. The TV industry just isn't prepared to license all of that around the world on a lucrative basis. So we looked at it and thought, well, actually, there's a long tail of non-scripted programming that isn't being monetized. So why don't we try and publish it into this online video world and see if we can make any money? So that was really where we started, and we took a lot of our content that was probably, documentaries, human interest stuff, shock docs, nature, that was sort of 3 to 5 years old, and we published it online and so went into
under ITV, under separate channels.
So we under separate channels. So the ITV brand is not well known outside of the UK, not surprisingly. So we publish things like Our World, which was a nature channel. Our histories, we put all our history content onto it. And we've now got 160 owned and operated social channels around the world, and it's growing week on week. Actually, I think
160.
So I think last
all
week
video
we
based.
Pets Up Close, I think, was our new channel.
That's your new channel?
Up Close, we've got Love Island.
What's your biggest channel?
So The Voice is our biggest channel.
That makes
sense. The Voice channels have been running for about 10 years now.
And that's global. It has different
and
arms.
it's global. There's over 150 versions of The Voice around the world. So we take all of that and put all of that into, we've got about 60 voice channels on YouTube and across all other social media, delivering billions and billions of views on a weekly basis, on a yearly basis. And then I think what we've also done, and I think where that journey has taken us into Zoo 55, which we launched in January of this year, is taking all of that activity, realizing actually we're pretty good at it, realizing that actually there is a business there for us.
We were operating 160 channels.
Yeah,
so we have a core competency.
and that's just the social sites. Then
Right.
we're also launching we're running a fast portfolio. So digital social is one of the pillars in Zoo 55. The other is in fast.
How many channels
So
in
we've
Fast?
got over 100 deliveries of fast channels. There's about 18 that we focus on the most. So Hell's Kitchen, The Voice, Love Island.
Huge brands.
And Schitt's Creek for those fans, and various other things. So we are testing a bit of drama as well. River Monsters, a number of different channels that we're now out onto multiple platforms around the world. And then our third pillar is gaming. So if you take something like The Voice, you've got your social channels, you've got your fast channels, and you've also got the games, and you can do your auditions in the metaverse with The Voice. If you take something like Love Island, you've now got big social channels, you've got the world of Love Island in fast, and you've got a very, very successful Love Island game. And it's amazing to watch that grow. So I'm sure you're all massive. Who's a massive Love Island fan? Who's
Raise your
too
hand high.
nervous to
Admit
they're
to
a
it.
Love Island
Be
fan?
proud.
Come on, you all are secretly. So I think I think it was over 1 billion streams on Peacock in July last summer for Love Island in the US, and we saw a huge uptick in the number of people who were downloading the game. I think it was in the top 20 most successful iOS
What is the game?
games. So you get to play as a character, and talking a bit about your Shopify, we sell hundreds of usually bikinis in the app every second.
Real
on the
bikinis or virtual bikinis?
virtual bikinis.
Really? Wait a minute. Say
in
that
the
again.
app.
Say that whole phrase over again. You sell
So with it, so we literally sell hundreds of
virtual bikinis.
virtual bikinis every
Virtual
second
weenies.
in the Love Island game. Yeah, in-app
Cuckoo for
purchases.
Cocoa Puffs.
Yeah. So who knew that was a whole world? And
You did,
really missing
apparently.
out. So
Yeah.
I knew.
Someone had to
recently-
decide to sell bikinis in
Yeah,
a virtual
I
game.
suddenly feel like one of those old Europeans. Although I've got 2 kids, so I am contributing to the younger generation. But so you kind of start to paint a different world. And I think the bit that really excites me about that, and the reason I use Love Island as an example, is because I really believe there is a massive fan base for Love Island who have never watched a long-form episode on television. So when you're a content owner, an IP owner, and you've got some of this great content going on around the world, and you've relied on television forever, and you suddenly realize that actually you've got an enormous fan base who love your brands and your IP, but probably aren't consuming it in that traditional way of television, you've got to scratch your head and say, well, hang on a minute, what do I do? How do I transform my business? How do I become so user-focused on that sort of fan base that wants to consume our content? And where do I find them? How do I engage with them? Because your virtual bikinis, you don't have to have watched it on television. You can still be buying it off social media apps
Right.
and stuff. So I think that's the big journey for us as a business. So we launched Zoo 55 in January of this year, which sort of took the digital team out of the traditional business and created its own entity. And for many reasons, because I think it needs a digital-first mentality, not a traditional distributor mentality. It needs a different culture. It needs to test and learn, and it needs to do that really fast. So spinning it out, created its own sort of leadership structure, and really going for it as that bit of the business is really exciting for us. And it's currently probably around about 15% of our overall revenue.
I was going to ask you that question.
Yeah, which has grown rapidly.
Yeah,
and
so
that will grow.
over what time did it go from 0 to 15%?
So probably really in 3 years. And that,
Wow.
I can say this because our CEO said it in our annual results last week, but the plan is to double the size of that business by the end of 2027. And I think, again, if you look at the 90,000
Well,
hours,
eventually that becomes the main, that will
becomes
become
a
the
really
larger
critical
part of the business.
It does, because 95,000 hours of content, we haven't even scratched the surface yet, really, of things that we can start to bring.
And so just to get this straight, so this is Zoo 55 itself is primarily for distribution across non-traditional television platforms, correct?
Yeah,
so
correct.
YouTube would be included in there and all the others,
No.
and then audio and gaming and fast, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so these are social media platforms for the most part,
Yep.
the biggest companies on the face of the earth.
Yep.
many of whom, when people say, I'm not going to put my content there because I don't want to empower them, how do you put that into your head with regards to this strategy? You are using these platforms to generate revenue and actually build future audiences for your IP. What's your approach to working with Google and Meta and the rest of and ByteDance and the rest of the large?
I genuinely believe that they're different audiences. So, and I actually genuinely believe that if you get it right, you can complement your PSB traditional TV business. And that's what we do. And I think that's where I'm fortunate that I sit within the ITV PLC, because we're right next to a PSB. And I think, we also announced at the end of last year, so Zoo55...
Public service broadcaster.
Public service broadcaster. So Zoo55 operates the YouTube business for ITV in the UK. So we're on that journey together, and we can work with them as a broadcast business to understand how their audiences go between linear streaming and YouTube. And you can already see that the complementary audiences that are coming into that world, and then much to sort of John's points, ITV are then monetizing that audience through advertising. So we've got a world where we can start to partner with broadcasters, and we're partnering with others around the world who are traditional clients of ours. And then we've also got this sort of right to win in our own space. That Zoo55 can do digital first, unique stuff. I mean, we just launched the Hell's Kitchen Roblox game at Christmas, and over 30 million users.
Wow. Anybody here in the first panel where we talked about Roblox? Yeah, I mean, it's the second time they've come up, but that's another extension for fandom, correct?
Yeah, and it's a huge fan base. And then I think, the bit that we're not yet, and one of the reasons why I think it's really interesting to hear John and these guys speak is because it's an ad-based business, and we're not.
Right.
We've been a B2B, we've been a business-to-business licensing business forever.
Do you sell your your YouTube channels? Are you selling the inventory, or is YouTube?
So in the UK we are now through the ITV commercial team, but internationally we're not yet. And that's one of the things you've got to think about.
To do that,
the same for our fast channel inventory actually, because that we're starting to do more with our inventory around that. So in 2024, we garnered 25 billion views across our social channel portfolio.
Wow.
So when you look at that number and you think, well, there's so much more we should be doing with that. There's so much more we should be doing with the data that we're getting from that, with our capability to move up the value chain in advertising, for selling bikinis in Love Island apps, but all sorts of things. So that the journey is really just beginning for us, and we've turned the business and evolved into something new. And I think it will just.
Well, it is interesting. I think so often the PSBs, the public service broadcasters, but even the commercial outlets also only see social video, social platforms as competition, not as opportunity. But it seems, one of the most storied social, public service broadcasters out there is now embracing these platforms as the future of their audience and of their revenue.
I think, Evan, what's interesting about that is I think a lot of the fear for big players, it has to do with like platform disaggregation,
Right.
And at the point that you're seeding, for a company like Paramount, like we don't want to get turned into a production company, but we have large.
Do you embrace social video?
We totally embrace social video as a complement around. It's very IP based, but I think like Ruth's point is it's very important because what you're seeing here is incremental opportunity.
Correct. This is new audience,
around
new
content,
revenue.
around a content library.
Yeah.
And it's obviously an important element of all of our businesses.
Well, and Pluto would be a good example of that.
Yeah.
Paramount. Yeah. I'm sorry.
The big one for us is the Graham Norton show.
Oh yeah.
So there's probably people in here who watch that, but you've probably only ever watched it as clip form. Right. So
I love it, but I only watch it on TikTok.
And what's really interesting for us as well is that indexes a lot with Meta. So half that viewing comes on Facebook, half it comes in YouTube. And that's because of your old people in Europe story, I think, in there. But really interesting how you get all those different dynamics. But I know a lot of people who watch it through clip form and they've never necessarily watched a long form episode.
Yeah.
And that's a new audience and incremental.
And I think that, even for a show as young as Love Island, so you would think that audience isn't going to get any younger than it is on your app, right? On your ITV.
Yeah, exactly.
Just no one older admits it.
Right. Well, but a lot of that audience still is there is still a new, younger audience or a different audience online that doesn't watch television. They just don't. They watch YouTube. That's their television. Yeah. So, Justin, we've done yes.
for your route in terms of data collection, those partnerships with the social platforms. Traditionally, they are not so open to share data, more of a consolidated data. What's your experiencing during these last 3 years with that?
So
Great question.
you're asking about how we're collecting it or how successful we are at collecting good data?
With your FAST and
With
your
FAST.
YouTube and
So
your Instagram.
mixed, I guess, is the honest answer. I think getting much better. And I think we get data from various different sources around it. And it is key when we're doing our partner deals is to try and get hold of that first-hand data. If you think about where we've come from to where we are now, it's significant improvement, right? Because again, in a licensing world, we license our content to a platform who owns the audience. So other than Justin's great numbers from the UK or others elsewhere, they're the only real ratings data we get, and it's all second-hand, whereas I think now moving into more of that first-hand data, which is getting better and better, is quite a game changer for us when we think about what we can do around the production business. So if we're collecting data that's suddenly telling us there's a huge audience for Hell's Kitchen in Spain, well, brilliant, let's go and sell a new version of Hell's Kitchen in Spain, or whatever it might be. So how do we use that data to feed the broader studio, our production businesses, our broadcast partners, and that so what around data for us is really quite interesting as a content producer, as well as being the content owner and the advertising world that we'll move into more wholeheartedly, I think.
Well, and in the question of data, I do want to get to our other panels. I will get back to you, I promise. What does the data tell us? I mean, I look at the data that we've worked on now over the last 6 months, and I see two distinct ecosystems. The way that Ruth is describing, I think very accurately, two very different audiences gathering on the TV, even if it's in a streaming app, and those gathering on platforms like YouTube, but on Roblox and non-traditional areas, very often still through the television set or through some other devices. A, is that what you're seeing? And B, tell us what you see as the evolution of this space from the perspective of somebody who has to measure this audience. How do you keep up with these times and now this new user-centric era when you have to measure behavior of these users who are fragmenting so much?
So a bit of context first, which I think is helpful, because the way we organise audience measurement in the UK is different to the way it's organised here.
And better.
Thank you. Barb was established 45 years ago, and we're what's called a joint industry measurement body, so we're not for profit. We're completely motivated by the need to provide the likes of Paramount, the likes of ITV, advertisers, media agencies with independent, authoritative evidence which shows what people watch. So our line is we are the industry's standard for understanding what people watch, and there's a very deliberate possessive apostrophe in there because we are of the industry for the industry. So just a little bit of context to help you understand where we come from. And to your question, Evan, the challenge we had going back 8 years ago, if you looked at our data from the perspective of traditional broadcasters, there was this bit of viewing that was growing hugely, and we called it unknown viewing. Now, unknown is anathema to Barb. We need to know what people are doing. Now, this was essentially representing the growth of the streamers, but at the time, we weren't measuring them. The other issue was from the streamers' perspective, who at the time weren't engaged with us. They were relying on their own data, their walled garden platform data. And the conversations we were starting to have with them, we were saying, but your data is a bit like, I don't know if you ever had in the US, in sports, you would have a player cam where you follow one player around the pitch, which is interesting, but you lose the whole context of why that player is doing what they're doing. And living on first-party data alone is a bit like that. So this was the problem we sort of resolved to sort out. And we also heard advertisers and agencies saying, we want you, Barb, to be audience-centric. We don't want you to measure services because they happen to fund you. We want to measure everything people watch. So we decided to sort of build independent ways of measuring the streamers. We put a meter on the Wi-Fi routers in panel homes. We started using a form of ACR, which we call audio matching, to identify the programs that people were watching.
ACR is automatic content recognition. That is glass level recognition of what's being watched, not necessarily by whom.
Yeah, and the panel, you have all the, we have a representative panel of homes, which allows you to know who's in front of the screen, what type of people they are, and panel data is really important to add color and context.
So just for scope, it's about 8 million different homes that you're in with regards to screens, big data basis?
From a big data perspective, we're collecting data from about 8 million devices on average a day.
And then about 7,000 to 8,000 homes from a panel?
Yeah, and you put those two different data sets together, complementary strengths, and you get proper insights. And a couple of little headlines. Great news, content drives share for services. I'll give you one example from last May when, I don't know if it was big here in the US, but Clarkson's Farm. No?
Nope.
No? Okay, so...
Anybody here at Clarkson's Farm?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, a couple of people, great. So it launched season 3 on Amazon Prime Video. In the 2 weeks running up to the drop of Clarkson's Farm, Prime Video was getting about 2.5% of total viewing. As soon as Clarkson's Farm drops, it goes up to 4%.
So it doubles.
So content drives share, and we see it on ITV last autumn when I'm a Celebrity was on, ITV share grows. We've seen some great examples on some of the Paramount channels, Channel 5. I could go on, but there's a lot. But the other thing we can now tell, because of what we're doing, is when content creators transition from the social space to TV, a good example being Mr. Beast. Beast Games on Prime Video, we know how many people watched that. So the first season got an audience of 3.3 million, which is pretty respectable, not as big as The Traitors on BBC or Mr. Bates and Post.
Yeah, but it should be. It's also relative to the base. Amazon is not necessarily a top 3 platform in that ecosystem yet, and so for them to pop a number that's a huge increase from where they start.
Yeah. So we built these independent measurement techniques. We made them part of our data outputs, and then the streamers started getting interested in this, and we've now got all of them buying our data. Some of them are working more actively with us to collaborate to bring their data into.
But crucially, you're measuring viewership across all 4 devices.
Yeah.
So laptops, phones, tablets, and TVs.
Yeah.
And you're measuring it. You're cutting it by age and other types of demographic profiles. It does seem to me that in 4-screen viewing, the movement is much more towards social video and away from the traditional television providers. Is that, or not? Am I wrong about that?
So the way we present our viewing data, we put it into 3 buckets. We have what we call total broadcasters, which is the linear and streaming services for the likes of Paramount and ITV. We have pure play VOD, which is the likes of Netflix and Amazon Prime Video and Disney+, and then we have social video. The first 2 of those buckets, virtually all the viewing's on a TV set. Social video, which is primarily YouTube and TikTok, half of it is on other devices. But we can see YouTube growing on the TV sets.
What share of viewing of YouTube would you say is viewed on TV in the UK?
So across the last year in the UK, we saw 41% of YouTube viewing on the TV set. Now, we've got to bear in mind that doesn't include viewing off the Wi-Fi network. So if we had access to that data, that number would go down. And actually, we also flag up that number includes kids who watch a lot of YouTube on the TV set. If we took kids out, the number, again, that percentage would go down in terms of the percentage of YouTube viewing that's on the TV set.
YouTube are telling us about half of our content is viewed on a connected television.
Half?
Yeah, about half.
We'll have you the truth soon.
But a good example
that's
these,
global too, isn't it?
Yeah. And a good example of trying to put viewing in context. So we did an experiment with The Chase. So some of you may be familiar with the format. It was on ABC for a while here, and it's a big sort of Access Prime show in the UK. So on ITV, The Chase will probably get around about 3 million-ish.
She's testing me.
Okay, just nod. Let's go with that.
Yeah.
Maybe 2-3 million. And we did an experiment with the Sidemen, who obviously I'm sure
Yep.
you're familiar with. They're a well-known.
Second panel in a row that they got.
So they have been talking about the chase for ages on their own platform, and so we said, hey, just come to the set, come and record something on the set for yourselves. So they did, and within a week, their episode of their own version of the chase got 7 million views.
Wow.
So they can within a week beat what traditional television.
Well,
And we can see that because this is such a growing area, this is where we're going next. And we announced
I was just going to ask about this.
just last week or the week before, we're planning to report on the TV set, and we do this independently of Google, viewing to 200 YouTube channels.
Individual viewership for 200 YouTube channels.
So, yeah, and already if ITV puts content onto YouTube, we already get that, and we can already report what percentage of ITV viewing is on YouTube. But we're now going to go into channels like
Do you
Mr.
attribute
Beast.
ITV's viewership on YouTube to ITV in your data or to YouTube in your data?
We attribute it to ITV, but you can see the percentage of the ITV viewing that comes through the YouTube platform. But we'll be looking at things like Mr. Beast, The Rest is Politics, which is a big UK political podcast. And so that's the direction of travel now, which is to lift the lid on the content people are choosing to watch on YouTube on a TV set.
Well, and podcasting on TV is now, there are a billion people. There are a billion who watch podcasts on TV. 1 billion, who here has watched a podcast on television? There you go. 1 billion people now watch podcasts on television. So the definition of premium is definitely changing based on the eye viewership of the viewer.
Also, in some cases, it's like super long. Like those
right,
Joe Rogan
hours.
things are
I mean,
3
hours long.
Right,
So the viewership, the percentage of content that is watched on YouTube is growing towards long form, 30 minutes or more.
Right.
70% of YouTube viewership is content that is 30 minutes or more. So when YouTube becomes television, right, and when there are two ecosystems growing, what do you measure? Steve, you are a measurement company. That's your business, literally.
Yeah.
What do you measure? What do the clients want to see measured? Is it outcomes now, or is it viewership? We did a study last fall called The Score, where we showed how much ad viewership, 85+%, was in pay TV and broadcast.
Correct.
The complete opposite of what I think people thought. Is that what we should be measuring? What does the modern user-centric era need in way of measurement?
Yeah, look, I think in general, based on all the conversation tracks that we have up here, there's just a fundamental change about user experiences that the measurement ecosystem has to continue to evolve into. And so, Comscore is a company been around for 25 years, known for traditional linear television measurement, kind of very traditional ad measurement, right? And the combination of those two things, it's always been the thesis of the organization that the consumer is going to eventually converge, and I think we're past the evangelism stage, right? This is now the reality of the media ecosystem that we set, and the term currency, right, in the traditional sense, right, that data set of transactability for traditional pay TV, that element of verification, unified measurement, accredited methodologies, moving into a streaming environment is critical because this is where we're starting to see the reality of these channels ultimately play out. But then there's two sides of that, right? Which is, on the sell side equation, how do I think about my content, my content development and my distribution? And then on the ad side, it's about cost efficiency. And I think ultimately, the consumer is going to dictate where their time and attention is, right? The remote control of our life sits in our pocket every single day.
That's right.
and complements the screen that's sitting directly in front of us. But then there's the transaction aspect of how all of this is also fundamentally changing, right? The speed by which programmatic infrastructure is now converging into the system changes the game for how we think about measurement across the board. So for us, it is about just purely measuring where consumers are and what they're doing. But our personal consumer trajectory takes us on a lot of screens, a lot of formats, depending upon day part, right? Our family status, where we live. And those are large-scale data problems, right, that ultimately you need to be able to get behind to understand not only the breadth and the engagement, but also the granularity of where you can optimize for change. So to the point about, well, where do we think about measurement? Well, measurement in general has to evolve in two ways. One, the speed by which it's deployed back into the marketplace has to be at current standards because, again, the nature of the programmatic infrastructure that's converged. And then the second piece of it is ultimately back into that optimization timeline. We've spent a lot of time over the the years talking about broad-based reach. And then at the same time, right, we've quickly pivoted into a very performant-driven mindset. And I agree with John completely, right? The conversations with our clients are more about ROAS, right? How do I think of advertising from a COGS perspective? Measurement really has to inform this middle layer of the funnel at a much more appropriate rate than where it has, right? People cannot wait 6 weeks after the end of a campaign to be able to then make decisions about what the next cycle looks like, because the transactions of how media is being deployed, or advertising is being deployed, and how media and content are being created ultimately are converging here. So for us, measuring consumer experiences within the constraints of time is absolutely core. We're in a spot right now where, at least in the US, right, we have over $50 billion of traditional advertising transacted in traditional television formats, right? And streaming is about 30 billion plus or so. And by 2028, I think we're going to be at that crosshair where it's a 50-50 split, and then we can kind of see where the story takes us in the future state. For us, it's that consistency and that reliability of strong data that is, again, being able to deploy to be able to carry that story through. We can talk about streaming, and we can talk about digital, we can talk about the rise of these platforms. They are real, we are seeing it, I agree. They're completely different audiences. We've had some of our partners work with us that have taken the baseline of linear television and optimized their CTV ad spend during in-flight linear and been able to achieve 100% incremental reach on a campaign, right? Non-reachable users in the traditional format.
By buying different apps and different ecosystems within that.
Native apps, social video, right?
They're doing that, and they're optimizing in real time.
And they're optimizing at the speed by which the systems allow for them, which is near real time in some cases. And this performance ultimately evolves. So our products have had to follow suit with that, right? Our data sets have had to be incorporating more first-party client data to also aggregate, the third-party data sets that exist. But it's speed, and it's speed at that mid-funnel. That optimization point ultimately is the make or break here.
Well, there are a couple of major opportunities here. We talked about retail media to a certain extent. I mean, retail media is very fast-growing. It's fast-growing on connected television. And the concern amongst retail media buyers that I have looked at research on and have spoken to is that they've concentrated so much on the bottom of the funnel, on performance, that they're losing the top of the funnel, that they're losing the awareness they need to sell these products, hair reshaping or whatever it is. And so they are concentrated on, they still want performance, but they want it nearer at the top of the funnel.
One of the issues is that though the capabilities have changed, the approach remains unchanged, right? And what you need, you cannot silo a top of the funnel and bottom of the funnel thing. And when we started talking about performance initially, we got so much blowback. Like, are you saying that television is only performance media? I'd say no, it's both. We can express its value in both ways. I think where it matters, though, is that with the marketers, they have prioritized investment in social because of the lexicon.
As a knee-jerk, almost.
Right, as a knee-jerk. And that it's an allocation problem as opposed to like a format problem, right? And this is where I think the business needs to evolve. I mean, the other point I want to make, like just building on what Steve just said, is when it comes to monetization of viewership, the future of the advertising business is buy-side decisioning, okay? Meaning it's programmatic activation based on a match, my identity graph as a buyer, right? Understanding who is on the other end and based on my value of that customer. As it goes to these questions, your question about platform and data surfacing, on some delay, we can understand perhaps what the viewing metrics are. We will never, ever be able to offer, as a publisher, buy-side decision against our content on YouTube. It's against their policies. They will not surface their own first-party data. And, it's a real problem in terms of the quality of monetization when you start distributing your content on social platforms with the expectation that it's going to align with the direction and the trends of agency and brand direct
But as a
investment.
publisher the size that you are, do you not have some, and by the way, does anybody have any questions? Definitely start. Okay, great. I'm going to let you finish this. As a publisher, don't you have some, isn't there sway? It does seem to me that these platforms are very reliant on not just creators, but increasingly on the big professional studio publishers like yourself.
But it's
Who has
a
a question?
policy question, Evan. They're not, you know, they just, because of their own privacy policies. So what a platform
true,
will say is, you sell the sponsorship, I sell the audience. That's not going to work long term for us as a publisher.
Yes, hi. I'm Aline from Particle 6. I love Graham Norton clips, and I always watch them in the reels on Facebook, 'cause I'm a millennial, and I don't have TikTok. And I totally get it if you're in Spain and you're getting that data and you're like, oh, people really like this in Spain, we're going to sell the format to Spain or make a reversion. What's the benefit to you in the UK in sending those reels out to people like me who are not going to watch Graham Norton the long form, but are just really enjoying the shorts? What is ITV getting out of that is my question.
Incremental audience viewing. I mean, we make that, it's an ITV Studios owned production company that makes that for the BBC. So it's just engagement with and a fan base for that show and that return that will go back to SoTV, which is a production company that ITV Studios owns. So we're supporting production, distribution, and the ecosystem within ITV's business.
Hi, I'm Lynette, working for ZDF Studios. So, hi, Ruth. Lovely to meet you. And you other guys are the pioneers of change. I love what you're saying. How do you manage internally to justify the work you're doing with the new work, the new business? What I mean by that is we're so used to working the B2B realm and creating these relationships with the buyers, and now we're talking a totally different vocabulary. We're talking different universe, different numbers, different everything. How do you manage to communicate internally that this is what needs to be done to change?
Crikey, I'm a big believer that necessity is the mother of invention. And I mean, I'm sure Justin will be able to say very clearly how much the linear audiences have declined over the last sort of 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, we need to get it in context. If you look at total viewing in the UK and you break it into, is it streamed or is it through other platforms? And is it viewed on the day that the programme is first shown, or is it not? Actually, the biggest lump of viewing is still not streamed, viewed on the same day as broadcast. So there's life in linear on the same day still. But yes, the trend is towards streaming, the trend is towards on demand. And one of the most misquoted phrases of all time is survival of the fittest. It's not survival of the fittest. What Charles Darwin said was survival of the fit. If you want to continue to evolve and thrive, you have to continually fit into the changing environment around you. And if you don't keep adapting to fit into the changing environment, you die.
But you're right, the internal conversation is not an easy one. You know, it's hard to move at a pace at which the audiences require. So, you know, you will lose your fan base before you can catch up with what you need, and that's what you don't want to happen. So I think it's been about putting quite a few small bets together and proving them out and building that momentum internally. And hence I said, you know, the Zoo 55 business is the culmination of sort of 4 to 5 years of internal teams building that till we got to a point where you could say, this is a meaningful part of the business. We've proved the concept, and then it can become much more of a thing internally. And then the momentum of that has driven ITV's evolution in the UK into YouTube channels and finding incremental audiences, because there's been a lot more conversation in the market around they are incremental. So if they're not, the fear was always cannibalization, and I think that's being proven to not be the case. So I think it's just bit by bit these sort of critical mass of baby steps get to a position where internally you can start to paint a much more positive picture, but that definitely takes time. So I can see the sort of pain behind your eyeballs there.
But also in the world now of just consumer optionality, right, with media choice, I think the role of incremental, whether it's incremental audience just in another distribution format, or whether it's a short form format that ultimately brings some sort of awareness to it, I believe that there is this element of, you know, super user ROAS ultimately is going to support a large investment reality of content in the future. And so being able to understand where you can be able to market to Again, whether it's long form or short form touch points, at some point there is a conversion path that sits within there that then plays back into, the overarching, customer base growth strategy that plays.
Yeah, you're right.
Thank you for all of these insights. My question is AI changing the monetization of viewership as you called it? And if so, how so?
So I think there are a few ways initially that AI is going to disrupt the advertising business. We would start with creative, right? So the generation of creative, both in terms of Lydia's area, which would be understanding the insights that inform a creative choice, right? We're seeing that happen right now. This notion of creation of 15-second advertising based on contents of a website, right? Auto generation of creative, incredibly important from the standpoint of a long tail of advertising, right? We've long held this thesis that the promise of digital is that when you're buying it one impression at a time, you don't need to, it's not a $100,000 budget, you can spend it, $10, $50, $100 at a time, and open up the long tail would allow the format to compete with social. The problem is, if you're an SMB advertiser, you don't have any budget to create the 15-second, 30-second unit. So, yes, small, thank you very much, small and medium business. That's where we think a lot of monetization potential could be unlocked for the format, and that's the one that is more immediate. There are a lot of products in the market right now. The Adobe product is very, very strong. The Amazon product is very, very strong, and I think that that's going to be an enabling piece for us.
The other thing, John, just to build off that, because I totally agree, is also this element of signal loss. Back to one of your earlier points, right? That's just the reality that we live in, right? Wherever we are globally, AI's ability to also analyze the amount of signal to inform the future state of how we think about contextual ad targeting, and the reality that we're losing the deterministic signal, I think opens up a tremendous door. I mean, you think about just you as a consumer on a day-to-day basis, everything that you're doing, the ability to hone in on that information, supply it back to a network partner, to a studio partner, to evolve the way that they think about the targeting aspects that roll into that. The traditional context of I'm on an outdoor enthusiast website, therefore I must be into camping, therefore serve me a note, takes in no other context of what I am doing in my media journey in and of itself. But also the amount of signal that sits out there to be able to do that requires a different level of infrastructure to condense that information. I think that's going to be a tremendous theme that is going to evolve over the next several years here. And frankly, I think it's incredibly powerful from a monetization vehicle. From a measurement vehicle, it opens up a different way to think about the assets, but also from a consumer perspective, it brings a different level of personalization back into their media experience.
When we talk about rights, I don't feel that the right markets are following us as well. I think quite often they would like to sell rights for one linear on live broadcast and then maybe 3 catch-ups or something like that. How have that discussion been with this development during the last years for you?
Yeah, I think rights is a tricky one, and will become increasingly tricky with broadcasters, who will want to retain as much as they can of those rights. I think, hence, Zoo 55 really started off the back of archive, that wasn't under license because the rights were straightforward and they were there for the distributor to use. I think, and in the UK, hence Zoo 55 operates ITV's, the broadcast business's rights, because we can do those in-license rights for them. So I think there's going to be a mix between, I think there's going to be a big rights struggle coming, as if there hasn't been one before, but another layer of, and I think that it's an interesting conversation because a lot of broadcasters are not in the best place yet to exploit those rights. And I think the other thing with YouTube is it's a global scaled business. So doing individual territory by territory rights is quite complex. So, for The Voice, the reason that's been so successful is because we always held on to the rights from the beginning in most of the markets. So we were able to scale it up and make it a global proposition. Whereas if you were doing that very much on a patchwork quilt. It just would not be the same business that it is today. So yeah, that's coming.
So yeah, so whether it's investment in content or investment in advertising, thinking about every single efficiency and step along the journey of the consumer and the ad is going to be a big part of how you get the real value from your properties, your platforms, and your intellectual property moving forward. Thank you, panelists. This was terrific conversation. Thank you all.